Jaxmi Chelkser wasn't usually an early riser, but today she was a woman on a mission. The idea came to her as she lay dozing in bed, and it was just so obvious that she opened her eyes. The more she thought about it, the better it seemed, and she had to resist picking up her Omnipad. They'd all been up pretty late before a class day, but it was almost a reasonable hour. She knew at least Kamara should be up soon, so Kaslin wouldn't drag too far behind. At least she could grab the twins for breakfast. Group invite. Belder, Kamara, Kaslin, Kellark, Melondi. Who's awake? Kamara? Belder. Been up for an hour. Melondi. I'm here. Kamara. This better be good. I wasn't getting up yet. Kaslin. Ugh. Do you know what time it is? Me. I had a great idea for the student show. Can you meet me down at the cafeteria in 30 minutes and talk about it? Kamara. Sure. The council girls were going to meet tonight to put some ideas together. Do you have something? Me. Yes. Kaslin. You do know what time it is, right? I'm not even on the student council. Me. You're in the orchestra, Lynn. Melondi, you're in the choir. Belder, I like your input too, please. Kellark, are you up? Melondi. I'm already dressed. I can walk over and get us a table. Belder. Want me to check on Kellark? Me. Yes, please. The more of us, the better. I think it's a good idea, but I want you all to hear it, in case it isn't. Melondi. Okay. Kamara. Can't be anything bad. One of the fourth years was telling me it's always just a boring concert. Me. See you all in half an hour. Kellark? Are you in there? She raised her voice, certain that she'd heard some movement inside. It's me, Belder. Hey, can you open up a moment? There was a sound of shuffling, and Belder leaned against the wall, waiting. More shuffling. Belder? Yes, it's me. Open up, would you? I'm going to be running late. The door cracked open just enough for Kellark to peep warily out into the hall, blinking against the light. Dark rings were heavy under her eyes, and she wore a haunted expression as she tried to focus. Goddess! Belder was taken aback, but rallied, and moved closer to check her properly. Sorry, but you look like the death warmed over, and you have a nasty cut on your head. Kellark flinched and pulled a step or two back, and Belder pressed into the room to look her over. She was a mess. The room wasn't much better. It didn't make any sense, and Belder lowered her voice, concerned. Kellark, what in the deep happened to you? I think I fell. Walking home? Kellark rubbed her forehead and winced. I must have hit my head. I got myself back and cleaned myself up, but it hurts. Belder leaned in and peered at the cut. You may have a concussion. I think we need to get you over to the infirmary. No. The infirmary, right now, Belder said firmly, as she pulled open the front door, yanking out one of the academy tops and tossing it over the chair, before pulling out her Omnipad. Come on, let's get you dressed. Put that on and find a skirt. I'm texting the others. Group send. Belder. Won't make it. Kellark hurt. Taken out to the infirmary. Talk later. Melondi held up her Omnipad as the foursome sat down with their breakfast trays. Hey, do you see this? One of the twins picked up their Omnipad and read, while the other managed to open her eyes and fumble for hers. Shit! I wonder what happened. Jaxmi set her pad down, I hope she's alright. We'll just have to ask Belda when we see her in class. Melondi chewed her bottom lip for a moment. We could go over to the infirmary and find out. Probably better if we don't. Jacksmy shook her head, then stabbed at her breakfast. We'd have to find them, and if it's serious, they wouldn't let us see her anyway. Melondi seemed uncertain, but the twin who was awake, that must be Kamara, nodded. Jacksmy is right. We'd only get underfoot. Anyway, what did you need to see me about, Jax? Something for the student show this fall? Yes. So, last night I got back to my room and... I watched some more of those videos for about an hour. Wait. Caslin held up her hand and tried to screw her eyes open enough to glower. You stayed up for another hour? You wake us up at 6:30? And you have the gall to act perky? Jacksmy bobbed her shoulders and smiled, before picking up her juice. It's a great idea. I think we should get you to the infirmary. Melondi giggled while Kamara put a hand on her sister's arm. She'll be alright when she finishes her tea. Anyway, what's on your mind? Okay, so I flipped through a couple of the different shows and watched some more of the acts. You know, like the dance with the twirling things. They're all set to music, and I started wondering if we couldn't do some more of those for the student show. Kamara thought about it and looked over at Melondi. I suppose it is a lot of singing and music. Have you listened to any of the music the professor gave you, Mel? Melondi nearly choked on her juice, but smiled at the familiarity. Actually, yes. A bit, anyway. He gave me a lot, but I started listening to the one he called Queen. I mean, none of the lyrics are translated, but the singer's voice is amazing. I've never heard anyone all over the pentatonic scale like that. He can go all the way from a deep bass up to a high flat. Caslin seemed to be returning to life and looked interested, or at least animated enough to raise an eyebrow. While Jacksmy exchanged looks with Kamara. Okay, you two are impressed. What's that mean to us non-musicians? Asked Jacksmy. It means he's really very good, stated Kamara, before shrugging at her sister. What? I listened to 4 years of you taking music lessons and sitting in recitals. I picked up things. Melondi traded a look with Caslin and nodded. She's right. I can listen to the show with that music group he was talking about and see how they are when I get time. The beat? He said all their work is on file at the library. That would be great, Melondi. Anyway, Mara, I know that we can't do a lot of the really fast stuff that we saw, but that thing with the sticks? I bet the gymnasts could do that one, or some of the girls with the IOTC group. You've seen them flipping those rifles around, right? There's one that's just a pure strength act, and they have an entire show about that done on the water. Damn, I bet the diving team would love that. All they usually get to do is stand around for group practices and talk to the parents. Kamara thought about that. You know, if you help me with this, you're a sure thing for the council election, right? Well, that wouldn't hurt. Jacksmith's smile would have done the Cheshire Cat proud. What about the costumes? Melondi frowned and thought. They were pretty intricate, and the leaves were all in... well, it's like that stuff. Jacksmith Chelkser tugged at the silk scarf she was wearing. This is called silk. Anyway, I know clothing and I think I can get some scent in time. Trust me, once it gets a little publicity, it's going to be all the rage. Tom set down his coffee and picked up his omnipad when it hummed and read over the message. Miv, who is Jama Hameres? She's messaging from orbit and says she wants to meet with me when she gets here. Jama? Miv called back from the bathroom. There was still another hour before they had to walk to class, and Miver had spent the night again. She'd bought a change of clothes, and she was still getting herself ready. Jama is a him. He's head of the archaeology department, but he's been out on sabbatical. I didn't think he was getting back until next week. You'll love him." Tom sipped his coffee and stared at the message, but glanced up when Mavere wandered back into the living room. "What would he want to talk to me about?" "I don't know, but it's bound to be something interesting. He's been all over the galaxy," she called back, as she went into the kitchen, rummaging around. "Should I be jealous?" "Maybe if he was 20 years younger. Garnia tells me he was a real catch when she started here. You should meet with him." Miv was leaning out over the counter and smirked, but then she canted her head, fretfully. "Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about Deshin." "You never did tell me what all of that was about," he said, as he finished his coffee, and peered at the bottom of his cup. Miv sighed and he looked back up. "I didn't want to worry you, but Garnia messaged me with her decision this morning. We're going to have to transfer her out." Tom still couldn't believe what Mavere had told him, and he'd been in a mood. Deshin Tersema was a fine student. She was bright, eager to please, and had a good mind, with the scores to prove it. He only managed to push away the scowl as he walked into class, nearly tripping over the Kerbal twins as he rounded the corner. The twins giggled a bit and shrugged at each other before turning back. "Professor, we wanted to ask you a question." "These are the tops we purchased," the other chirped. "The ones for the dive team. And we wondered—" "Do these blacks match?" asked the twins in stereo, as they bent slightly forward and struck mirroring poses, their cleavage giving their tops a solid fight for survival. On any other day, Tom would have been at a loss for words. "Only my mood, girls," replied Tom, as he gave the girls a dour gaze. The girls were stunning, but he utterly wasn't in the mood for this nonsense. "Now, Kamara, Kaslin, go sit down so we can start class." "But how did—" started one of the girls. Each sister was examining the other for anything out of place. "How did you know she's Kamara and I'm Kaslin?" finished the other. Tom nodded at the seats one more time. "Tell me when you think that you figured it out, and I'll tell you if you're right. Go. Sit down." Tom felt wretched as he pressed the girls, and watched the class starting to settle in. Jaxmi was standing off to one side talking to Zephyr, while the Kerbals were moving to join a cluster in the middle row, while Desala was laughing over something with Letzi. Nesther sat off to the back, frowning over at the group, and he looked a bit closer. Most of the girls were sitting clustered around Kellark, who... Good God! The girl had a bandage on her head and looked like 9 miles of bad road. That pulled Tom back to reality, and he settled his omnipad and notes on his desk. Whatever was going on caught Mavere's eye as well, as she moved to the front of the room. "Kellark, are you quite all right?" The girl seemed to shrink a bit at being called out. "Yes, ma'am. I got into an accident last night," she said quietly. "I see. Are you certain you're feeling up to class?" Miv asked uncertainly. Tom was wondering the same thing himself. The girl was usually quite pretty, with a thick mane of wavy black hair that she wore just down to her neck. She was in the academy jacket with the usual black t-shirt underneath, but everything about her seemed off, as if the girl had been pulled through a knothole, and none too gently. "I'm fine, Professor," she said. It didn't sound too certain, but Belda was just beside her and spoke up. "I took her to the infirmary and she's been checked out. She hit her head, but they say she isn't concussed or anything, and we're going to keep an eye on her today." Tom watched the Kerbal girls move in beside Kellark and Melondi, while Jaxmi finished whatever she was talking about with Zephyr and moved over. He probably owed the twins an apology. "Very well, if you're sure." Mavere cleared her throat. "All right, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the age of consolidation and the expansion into the undeveloped portions of Shill after. Tom glanced fretfully back at the girls and tried paying attention. It was an interesting subject on its own, and the lesson meshed fairly well with his lesson about the press of modern colonialism into Africa and South America, the opening of Japan, and... Tom stared at the single empty seat. It was difficult to keep his face a mask as he sat there. He'd only met Deshin 3 times now, and wouldn't claim to know the girl any better than the others. But for all that, the situation was just galling. It's a god-awful small affair. Tom shoved Bowie down in his subconscious box and turned slightly to face Mavere, fixing an attentive expression on his face, but he knew his heart wasn't in it. It really was a god-awful small affair in the scheme of things. There were 11 other girls who needed to make a future. Kerlark needed to be asked about, even if the other girls were taking it upon themselves to look after her. First exams were coming up. Tom glanced back at the empty seat. This wasn't someone dying. There wasn't a fallen soldier on the battlefield. And yet, it seemed callous, wrong, to just pick up and move on. They told him he could teach. Well, he was teaching. But was leaving a bright young woman behind over circumstances like this the right thing? Where did teaching end and being an educator began? Was that his call? Was it the head administrator's? Mercy never lets her face be shown. They draw blood from a stone. Tom shoved Cycle V back into their box right next to Bowie, but that was it, really. That was the question. The Academy was a school, a production line for the future, a system with a power of its own. But when did you stop the machine? When someone was getting ground under in grades, you helped them by giving them a tutor, but this was being ground under by circumstance, and it wasn't right. Professor Warwick? Tom was startled out of his reverie. Oh, I'm sorry, I was lost in thought there. Miv smiled. Yes, I could tell. It's your turn, Professor. Right. Tom picked up his notes, his thoughts flying apart and back together as he looked at the header. All right, Professor Palavon was talking to you about the age of consolidation here on Shill. I've been focusing on Earth's early industrial age, but today I want to set it in context against expansion by... Right. Tom stepped back from the projection screen, which was showing a map of the major powers and their colonial territories around 1890, and turned back to face the class. I think that's about it for now. Time for questions. Most of the girls took the chance to look over at how Kerlark was doing. Tom did as well. While she'd stayed with the class for the last hour and a half, the girl appeared to be desperately in need of rest. It was Melondi who raised her hand first, and Tom nodded, relieved the girls hadn't lapsed back into not talking. Professors, where is Deshin? And there it was. Tom's eyes flickered over to Mavere. At least he wasn't the only one thinking about it, but Miv would be the best one to answer. His own thoughts on the matter weren't going to be helpful. Mavere seemed to be searching for an answer when Jacksmy spoke up. Professors, we all expected to see her here today. I was going to... Well, we thought she'd be here. Jacksmy turned her head from Mavere to Tom and back. Is she all right? Girls, Deshin has had some trouble with her family. That is, I don't think she's going to be back. Mavere set her omnipad down and stood up, looking over the class. I'm sorry. I know a lot of you are her friends. She wouldn't leave like that. She'd say goodbye, said Sephir earnestly, before looking at the other girls who were nodding as well. I've known her since the start of first year. She'd say goodbye. Most of the girls nodded to one another, and Tom felt his stomach churn. It felt like the acidic roll he got after bad coffee, and knew it had nothing whatsoever to do with his morning cup. Kellark raised her hand, and Tom nodded her way. "Professor Warwick, you were telling us about political truths the other day. Is this something like that?" It was barely a whisper, and for most of the class, Kellark seemed to press through by force of will alone, but her gaze was steady enough right now. "She's not speaking very loud," bit out Nesta, "but she's asking the right question." Tom glanced over at Nesta Reshe. She was the daughter of the alumni chair that Garnier almost blackmailed him into meeting. That had been 20 long minutes, but the daughter was nothing like the mother. Where her mother was loud, even boisterous in her element, Nesta spoke seldom, and her questions and comments were sometimes biting, even angry, but always intelligent. "Yes, Nesta, she certainly is." Tom didn't bother to check the clock. Timing be damned. "Class is dismissed. Professor Pelivan and I need to talk. Enjoy your shell." "Head Administrator, Professors Pelivan and Warwick are here to see you. They have Miss Tsema with them." Garnier reached for the desk comm and rubbed her forehead a moment in frustration. The Tsema girl was due to be packed out that afternoon in the rush of shell, and that would have been that. This had to be Warwick's issue, then. Mevere hadn't been happy, but she'd understood. Picking up her glass of Ubeki, she stared at it for a moment before setting it back down and hit the comm. "Please send the professors in, Pelly. Just the professors." Mevere was first inside, with Tom Warwick close behind, looking rather more... Garnier didn't know him well enough to guess, but settled on intense. Garnier held up a hand and the trio paused, with Warwick looking to Mevere. Garnier waved the trio over to the seats before hitting her desk comm. "Pelly, please hold my appointments for now." "Yes, Head Administrator." As Garnier turned from her desk, she studied her guests. While her exposure to Tom Warwick was still rather brief, the human was holding his peace, and taking at least some of his cues from Mevere. Well, she could work with that. It wasn't as if she was happy about the situation, but Miv was a good friend, and seeing how she was doing with Warwick was worth something. "Before either of you say anything, I've dealt with it to the fullest extent possible under the Academy Charter. This is no longer a problem." Warwick looked furious, but Mevere put her hand on his arm, and whatever he was going to say was kept to himself. More and more interesting. "Garnier. No, Miv. Look, I've already seen Deshin Tsema's scores. She's a gifted student, but that's not enough. So I'm going to say it again. This is no longer our problem." "When does it become our problem, then, Head Administrator?" Tom's words were quiet, but intense. "I crossed a good bit of the galaxy to teach at this academy, which is supposed to have the best and the brightest. If I can't do that, then from where I'm sitting, it is our problem. You have to know—" "Professor Warwick!" Garnier snapped. For a wonder, Tom shut up. It was a small blessing. Whatever else she'd heard about humans, there was that. She took a deep breath, calming herself. "Professor Warwick, there are over 1,000 young women in this academy. I have to do my best to know all of them. You care about teaching, but I have to care about every aspect of their lives here. Trust me, I care." "But you are right there. I am here to teach. It's what I came here for, so why can't I? Just because Deshin Tsema isn't a noble." Garnier frowned, but Tom met her look and pressed on. "Head Administrator, I've not seen much of Shill. I've not even been off this campus, but I've been learning a lot. How is it right that there's free universal education, but some rule says this person gets taught, and that person doesn't? Where is that written? Because wherever it is, it's wrong. You think I don't feel the same way? I spent an entire afternoon with Deshin Tessema just the other day, when we pulled her after class. Ganya pursed her lips and sat down on the edge of her desk, facing the pair. We pass by the service towns all the time, and never think about the people living there. She's lived with 2 co-mothers since the death of her birth mother, and it seems as though they couldn't care less, so long as she's not underfoot. That young woman worked to get the scores that got her in, and the only thing faked on her application was her social status and her address. Deshin worked as hard as she could growing up to be at this academy, to be on the other side of the gates for a school that's not 5 miles from where she was living, instead of bus to one of the community schools. Ganya stopped herself and rubbed her forehead, feeling her temples pounding. I sat there all afternoon with her while she cried her eyes out, so please do not tell me I don't feel for her, or that I don't care. It's in the Academy Charter, Professor Warwick, as established by the Empress Zareka, when this school was established and superseded only by the Imperial Code of Education. That's what you and I both answer to. Mavere has told me about those schools. She knows teachers at some of those schools, and they're barely worth the name. So no, I don't accept it. There's no way you can just stand there and get to act like an Eeyore floating downstream over this. Tom stood up and moved over beside Mavere, clutching his hands. I'm not buying this, we can't all and some of us don't. That's all there is to it. Nonsense. You're the head administrator. There has to be something in the Code of Education that allows a student to be taught at this academy. Ganya drew a deep breath and huffed. Mavere had taken her own sweet time finding a man, but now that she had, well, she certainly had picked one that would be a handful. Warwick had shown enough sense to look to Mavere before charging in, and now he was right there at her side. Well, and well again. It was a shame that didn't change things. The only exception that can be made is according to the Code of Education. Those supersede our charter, and the only way we could teach Deshin is if she was in a core major we offer that no one else does. And no, Professor Warwick, we are not the only school teaching about humans. Warwick looked thoughtful for a moment before speaking. So, what if there is a subject we teach here at the academy that no one teaches in the community schools? What about English? I know you all use translators, but what about that? Is anyone actually teaching it? If not that, well, I'll find something. Alright. I get it. I'm not sure that is right, but I suppose we can see, Ganya said warily, before hitting the descom. Pelly, please run a check on Central Records and see if any other school is offering a course in English. English, Tom spoke up so he could be heard. In English, Pelly. And send Deshin Tessema in now, please. Yes, Head Administrator. Ganya cut off the comm and looked at the pair. Each looked like they wanted to protect the other as they stood there. When did I have to become the bad girl? Floated through her mind, as her office door opened. Deshin hesitated before stepping inside and closing it behind her. Ah, Deshin, come in, please. Ganya wanted to settle back against her desk, but refrained. That sort of behaviour wasn't for students to see, and she moved with careful deliberation to stand behind her desk. Deshin, both Professors Pellavon and Warwick have raised some interesting points on your behalf. Please, take a seat and... Head Administrator? Pelly's voice rose from the descom, and Ganya reached down, toggling the accept. Yes, Pelly. I have checked the records, and there is no school anywhere on Shill that is teaching English. Thank you, Pelly. Ganya closed off the comm and wrapped an arm around her stomach, resting her elbow, and setting her chin on her fist while looking at the unlikely trio. Deshin, I don't know how you feel about changing your major, but Professor Warwick was suggesting you might want to learn English. It's not a subject with any real demand. Deshin looked at Mivere, then over at Tom, before looking back uncertainly. If I take English, that lets me stay at the academy? It's pronounced English, dear. And yes, it will. The others, do they have to know about my family? That I'm not... well... I think that there was a family incident that needed your attention, but it's not in the habit of this office to discuss personal matters, Miss Tsema. It's not the proper behavior of a noblewoman to spend their time in idle gossip, and I expect you to remember that. Deshin's smile lit up the room, and while Ganya felt fatigued, her headache decided not to arrive. Still, that didn't fix everything. Professor Warwick, I expect the major in English was somehow omitted from the course guide. Regardless, I expect you to work with Professor Pellavon to get me a full syllabus before the spring term. It somehow got omitted for this semester. You'll have it by next week, Head Administrator. Tom was giving Deshin a reassuring nod before smiling back. Things get busy. Misprints happen. I expect the same thing may have happened with the chess club. No, he isn't at all slow, is he? Miv, what have you gotten yourself into? Ganya stretched and nodded. Just so, Professor. However, I am very much in earnest about this. You'll be doubling your course load, and this will be offered to all students for the coming semester. You're certain you understand all that entails? Warwick had the good sense to at least pause, but he looked over at Deshin, then nodded. I'm sure. Well then, Mr. Tsema, all that remains is for you to spend your shell unpacking and catching up on your missed classes. And, Mr. Tsema, good luck to you. Professor Warwick, please see to it that she gets back to her dorm with a minimum of fuss, won't you? I have a few other matters I want to discuss with Professor Pellavon. Warwick looked happy enough taking the win, and Ganya didn't blame him. As Warwick closed the door behind him, Ganya cast her mind back to last week's excessively energetic class registration, as a direct result of his first appearance on the syllabus. She'd need to set up a lunch with Ayala, probably several, so she could go back to pretending to be the head registrar, instead of her usual vocation as an overwrought hysteric. Still, that was next week's problem, though. Right now, there was the issue still in the room, and she looked back at her friend and raised an eyebrow. Well, he's certainly something. Miv, when are you planning on telling him? A dozen expressions chased one another over Miv's face, before she settled on a look of innocent confusion. Mivere, when are you going to tell him? I don't know what you mean, Ganya, Mivere said quietly, but she was looking down at her feet, and her voice was hushed in shame. I don't know Tom Warwick half as well as I'm suspecting I should, but I have been watching you two together. Miv, that man is in love with you. He deserves to know. Ganya, she started, but the words died unspoken, a look of anguish on her face. Ladies do not gossip, Miv. I said that, and I meant it. I also meant what I said about knowing every facet of this academy as its head administrator. That includes knowing where almost half of your salary is sent to. Ganya, please, I can't. I've been telling him he needs to stay separate from me all this time, to build up his reputation as a professor. But I just can't. I don't know how. Ganya looked at Miv, taking in her friend's distress, seeing it written on her features. Miv, I think it's time for some words of wisdom. She walked over and set her hands on Miv's shoulders. There are a great many things you do in this job. One is learning to keep people's secrets. I gained another one today, and so did you. But there are other secrets which should never be secrets, because someday they have to come out, and when they do, it only gets worse the longer they've been kept. Professor! Deshin kept pace beside Tom, but hadn't spoken until they stepped out on the commons. What you did for me? This is going to mean a lot of work for you, isn't it? It's all right, Deshin. Tom glanced around them to see if anyone was nearby as he considered. It was a lovely day for Shill, which meant it was hot and humid as a sauna, but the afternoon sun was beginning to set on the horizon, bathing the ocean waves with gold. Besides, you're going to make it up to me. If I'm taking on an entire set of coursework, you can help out. I can use a hand with the library collection every week, and I want to bring up the class scores. You're the brightest young lady in the class, so you're going to be the student advisor. Student advisor? She spoke slowly, testing the words, and Tom arched an eyebrow. I kind of like the sound of that. Student advisor. Good, Tom nodded. Let's get you back to your dorm. If you're going to learn English, you might as well be seen with the English teacher. Tom knew it was going to be a pain in the ass, but it felt like a win that mattered. He smiled as they walked, and started to hum. Professor, is that from one of the groups you mentioned in class the other day? Professor Pelavon said that music is important to you. Is it a human thing? We've all noticed. Well, I suppose lyrics are as good a place to start as any. That song is only about 12 years old in short years. Let's see. The words are learning to listen, learning to see, learning is power making me free. Free to believe again in my human side. Professor, I only knew the word human. What did the rest of it mean? You'll learn. Tom's smile was soft as they walked together towards the dorms. It means, well, it will be a good day.